I'm Liz Oyer, and I previously worked at the Justice Department as the pardon attorney. I spent 3 years there. Prior to that, I was a federal public defender for many years. Well, now I am standing up for democracy, my full-time gig, and I'm trying to do that through social media, writing, traditional media, using whatever small platform I have to try to get the word out about so many of the alarming and distressing things that are happening in our government, particularly focusing around the Department of Justice and legal issues, which is an area where I have some experience and expertise to share.
Did you expect to get the kind of response that you're currently getting and the kind of support you're getting?
I really didn't at all. I was very skeptical of the idea of making videos to put on social media. I didn't really think I had it in me to do that, and I didn't really imagine that people would be particularly interested in what I had to say. And then my cousin talked me into it. They really gave me a sell about the benefit of getting on social media and talking to an engaged and interested group of people. And they then connected me with this group of other social media influencers, including yourself, who were kind enough to share a lot of knowledge and wisdom with me and help me get launched on social media. And I have been so surprised at the response. I've just been really amazed at the level of engagement that people have. It's also one of the things that has really kind of made me feel supported during this really challenging time is that people take the time to write really uplifting comments that sort of show that my standing up and speaking out actually means something to people. So it's really been cool. And I really owe a lot to my cousin and you and the others who supported me at the very beginning.
What do you think you're most excited that people care about that you've been able to explain?
What I'm talking about mostly are legal issues that could be a little bit technical or arcane or in the weeds of things that are happening in the Department of Justice. And I'm trying to focus on issues that I think are really important and developments that I think should be alarming to everyone. But I wasn't sure that anyone would really want to dig into the weeds of what's happening with legal developments in this way. And people have. They've really been quite engaged and interested, and I've been heartened to see that my fellow citizens really want to know and understand what's happening with the laws in our country and with the rule of law and the Department of Justice. This stuff actually matters to people who aren't lawyers, which has been really good to see. And I think one of the things that's going to help us find a path forward through all of the current chaos.
Can you talk a little bit about how you left or what happened in that case?
I was fired abruptly from my job as the pardon attorney on a Friday afternoon. I was in a meeting with about 20 other people, and one of my colleagues frantically pulled me out of the meeting and told me that there were security officers waiting in my office to hand me my termination papers and walk me out of the building. I was absolutely in shock. I had no warning, no notice, no explanation as to why I was being fired, just a one-page sheet of paper that was handed to me. And next thing I knew, I was, piling my personal effects into a grocery bag and walked out of my office for the last time that day. I never got an explanation as to why I was fired, but one thing that happened immediately before my firing was that I declined to do something that was asked of me by the leadership of the department. They had asked me to prepare a memo to the Attorney General recommending that she restore the right to own a firearm of the actor Mel Gibson. They explained that Mel Gibson had a personal relationship with the president, that he was made an ambassador to Hollywood by President Trump. By the way, that's not a real ambassadorship. And that he'd made a lot of famous movies and he wanted his gun rights back. Mel Gibson had lost his right to own a gun after he was convicted of assaulting his ex-girlfriend. Domestic violence convictions cause you currently to lose your right to own a gun for a very good reason, because there's so much data out there saying that people who have firearms are much more likely to kill their victim in a domestic violence situation. And that's one of the most preventable types of deaths out there. If we make sure that people with domestic violence histories don't own guns. So, in any event, I certainly didn't have enough information to be able to make this recommendation that Mel Gibson should get his gun rights back just because he's a friend of the president and he's made some movies that Trump likes. I was unable to make the recommendation. I communicated that to the leadership of the department, and within a few hours of that, I was fired.
If you hadn't been fired then and magically had, I don't know, gone under the radar or something, how would you be handling the things going on right now?
It would be very hard to be in the Department of Justice right now. A lot of my colleagues who, were not fired have left voluntarily in the months following my firing, which is a real testament to how challenging it is to work there right now. Everyone in my former office really cared deeply about the work of clemency. The idea behind it is to provide second chances to people who have earned them, people who are living with lifelong stigma because of a criminal conviction. Pardon can help them to overcome that, or people who are serving outdated, overly lengthy prison sentences. A commutation of sentence, a reduction of their sentence, is a way to get really deserving people back to their communities and give them a second chance at life. But that's not what the pardon power is being used for in this current administration. And it's not being used in a way that many people, including myself, are comfortable with. It's really become very corrupted. It's become transactional. It's become a way to reward loyalty, a way for the president to enrich himself, frankly. So it's a really difficult environment to work in. And many of my colleagues have decided that they don't want to be a part of that and have left the Department of Justice since my departure.
Are there any cases that you were working on that were really like exciting and that like there are people who really deserve clemency that aren't going to get it?
Yeah, there are so many deserving people actually. And this is one of the reasons that I was really determined to stay on into the new administration is because clemency is work that should not be political. And there is some bipartisan support for the idea of granting second chances. And I believed that there was a path forward for the work in this administration. And there were so many deserving people waiting. There are even more now. When I last checked, there were about 11,000 people with clemency applications submitted waiting for a decision. Many of those people are people who have been in prison for 30 or more years, who have really demonstrated exemplary rehabilitation. But because of mandatory minimum sentencing laws, they are serving what amounts to a life sentence. And many of those laws are no longer even in effect. So these are people, if they were sentenced today, they would receive a significantly lower sentence. But because of the mandatory minimums that were in place at the time, they are serving effectively life sentences. And those people have no other avenue for relief. There's no relief available through the courts or through other means. So they're really just relying on the hope of clemency. And that is a very distant hope now because it seems that the only people who are getting clemency are people who have political connections or inside access to the White House.
It's so sad. My mom used to volunteer at the women's prison. There are so many people who are there that shouldn't be.
Yeah, yeah. No, we have a real problem of over incarceration in this country that is largely attributable to mandatory minimum sentencing laws. There are many people who commit serious crimes and need to be in prison, and some of them need to be in prison for a very long time. But there are also people who are in prison for a very long time because of very harsh and now outdated sentencing laws that don't accurately reflect the severity of their crimes.
And they're going to stay there because the people in charge of this country don't care. In terms of Epstein and Maxwell and everything, is there any like equivalent of something that was done in a positive light, but in a similar way that you were involved in?
Well, the situation with Maxwell, the way that something like that would typically work is if somebody who's a co-conspirator in some criminal activity has information to share, the time to approach that person to get that information is at the beginning when you're still in the negotiating phases of a resolution, and you might be able to get some additional information to help prosecute other people by cutting a deal with that person. That's not unheard of, and that is done in some cases to try to ensure that everybody who's involved in criminal activity is apprehended and prosecuted and appropriately sentenced. It wouldn't have been so unusual for the government to try to cut some sort of deal with Maxwell at the front end. But what's happening now, trying to negotiate some cooperation from her after she's already been sentenced to 20 years in prison, it's problematic because you really have to ask whether she could be trusted at this point. She's been convicted by a jury of 5 criminal counts related to the sex trafficking of children. She's facing 20 years in prison. She's only served a couple of years of that sentence. She's got quite a long ways to go. She's in her 60s already, so you have to imagine that she's pretty desperate to do whatever she can and say whatever she needs to get out of that situation. So there are really some serious challenges to her credibility and relying on anything that she might say at this point that make this just incredibly unusual. And another thing that's really unusual about it is that the Deputy Attorney General, who's the number 2 official in the Department of Justice, is personally meeting with her. For him to do something like that with someone in her situation is really unprecedented within the Department of Justice. And it shows sort of a lack of regard for the interests of the victims as well. There have been some outspoken victims in this case who are very upset that the Department of Justice is even considering cutting some sort of deal with Miss Maxwell. So what's happening now, there are versions of this that do happen in criminal cases frequently, but the particulars of this are really quite unusual.
Who would be the one typically in charge of it if it's not the deputy AG?
Well, that's a great question. It would normally be the line prosecutor, the prosecutor assigned to the case that would conduct that sort of meeting. And in this case, the line prosecutor, the lead prosecutor assigned to the case was Maureen Comey, who was fired about a week or 2 ago by the Justice Department. She was the person who oversaw the whole trial of Ghislaine Maxwell. She was the lead prosecutor assigned to that case and therefore probably knows more about it than anyone. So she's the person that you would expect to be in that type of meeting, which raises some real red flags and question marks about why she was fired just about a week and a half ago.
Wow. Would the Deputy Attorney General be in that meeting at all, or would he have anything to do with it whatsoever in normal circumstances?
The Deputy Attorney General would not be present for that type of meeting in normal circumstances. The Deputy Attorney General is usually pretty removed from the day-to-day of individual cases, doing the sort of higher level management of the department. So for him to be involved at all is really strange.
Did you ever imagine this was going to happen? Like when you stayed on, were you thinking that it was going to get to this point, or were you having hope that it wasn't?
I was shocked at how quickly things changed and how much things changed within the Justice Department. I did not expect this to happen at all. There certainly were changes in the DOJ during the last Trump administration, but nothing even close to this extreme. One of the things that's really different now is that we've seen Trump essentially stack the department with people who used to be his personal attorneys. And most of those people are continuing to treat their work the same way. They are loyal to Trump above all else. They haven't really made that pivot toward serving the people of this country. I mean, as an employee of the Department of Justice, you represent the people of the United States. You don't represent the person in the Oval Office or any one man or person. It's about serving your country. And these people who are running the Department of Justice now have taken the attitude that they serve Donald Trump personally, which has created many of the problems that we're now seeing.
If you were asked by the next president to come back, or would you join the government again?
I would, yeah, I would go back to government, and I hope someday to be able to go back. Public service has been really the most meaningful part of my career. That includes my time as a public defender as well, where I had the privilege every day of standing next to clients in court and advocating for them. And I loved that work. I loved my time at the Department of Justice. It felt like a really meaningful opportunity to bring a needed voice into some of the conversations about administering the laws of our country. And it was a privilege to do that. It was a very meaningful chapter in my career, and I hope to be able to be part of the effort to rebuild and repair the Department of Justice when this administration comes to an end.
How does it get repaired? What are the steps to repair it? Is it a fast process or is it something that's going to be really slow, like repairing USAID or something like that?
Repairing the Department of Justice is going to be a very lengthy process. The damage that has been done in just 6 months, I would imagine, will take years, if not decades, to repair. Part of the problem is that so much expertise has been lost. The leadership of the department has been targeting experts, non-political experts in key areas, areas like national security, cybersecurity, things that are fundamental to enforcing the laws, as well as areas like professional ethics, professional responsibility, information policy. Really, at all levels of the department, people who are experts have been rooted out and fired or sidelined by administrative leave and other measures. And to replace all that expertise is going to be a time-consuming and difficult process. But also, really, the reputation of the department has suffered a huge amount. I think that the leadership has really discredited the department as a non-political law enforcement institution through their actions. Their attacks on courts, their disrespect for court orders has really done a lot of damage as well. And all of this is going to take a great deal of time to rebuild and repair.
What would be the first step? How would that process start?
I think that coming up with a vision for what the future Department of Justice looks like is the first step. And I think that there are people who are already working on this. There were obviously some things that needed to be changed about the department and some things that made it vulnerable to this sort of takeover by Trump loyalists. And we need to think about how we can make sure that that doesn't happen again. And we need to, frankly, fix some of the inefficiencies that created the opportunity for this sort of takeover of the Department of Justice as well. I went into the work as somebody who had spent 10 years as a public defender, and I had some notes. I had some critiques, things that could be done better and differently in the Department of Justice. Nothing along the lines of the changes that actually had been made, but I think there are really thoughtful changes that could be made that would make the department better serve our communities. So I think, the goal shouldn't be to recreate the department as it once was. It should be to build it back better, and that will take a lot of thoughtful people getting together and coming up with a vision and a plan.
What are some things that you think could have been improved?
Well, I think that one issue within the department is that most of the people who lead it and who are in positions of authority there have come up through the Department of Justice and have spent most or all of their careers as prosecutors. And I think that bringing in outside perspectives like mine, people who have served as defense lawyers, people who are directly impacted by the justice system, people who represent community interests is really, really important. And I think carving out a larger role for those voices as the department sets its policies is an important thing to think about for the future.
Have you considered running for some kind of office so that you can make these changes? Like,
I have thought about it. One of the complications, in addition to the fact that I'm not sure I would be very good at raising money, which I think you have to do a lot of to run for office, is I live in Washington, D.C., where we don't have any voting representation in Congress. So there are limited things that you can run for. There are local government positions, but we don't have a voting representative. We don't have senators. I really hope that in my lifetime that will change. But at the moment, I live in one of the most disenfranchised parts of the country.
it's pretty amazing that whenever people talk about disenfranchisement, they often forget to talk about DC.
Yeah, DC is actually bigger by population than some of the states that have a voting representative and two senators. Yet we have zero voting representation in Congress.
Though you do have a great delegate in Eleanor Holmes Norton. She really fights for you guys.
She does. It's very unfortunate that she hasn't been able to vote because I think some things throughout our history might have turned out differently.
A lot of people learned about you during the shadow hearing. Can you talk a little bit about that experience?
The Democrats in Congress have no ability to convene normal hearings because they're the minority. So what they've been doing is they've been convening these shadow hearings or spotlight hearings, they've called them, which are bicameral hearings, meaning that they bring in members of the House of Representatives and the Senate, but they're just the Democratic representatives. And they've been convening some hearings on issues of importance that really should be concerning to members of both parties. So it's unfortunate that it's only been the Democrats having these hearings, but I was invited to testify at one. I was invited to testify about the circumstances leading up to my firing from the Department of Justice, which I was happy to do because I think it's an event that should be concerning to all. And I'm not the only person to have been fired in this extraordinary manner from the department. I was expected to testify in that hearing on a Monday, and the Friday night before that hearing, I got a call on my cell phone from a Department of Justice number at about 9:15 in the evening, and I spoke to someone there who called me really just out of the goodness of his heart because he felt that this was wrong, to tell me that there were two armed special deputy U.S. Marshals, so law enforcement officers, on their way to my home to deliver me a letter. And the letter was a warning. It warned me about all the risks of testifying in this hearing should I choose to go forward. Fortunately, this person was able to help me get those marshals called off so that they didn't come to my house because I wasn't home. The only person home at that time was my teenager, and it would have been very upsetting to my child to see these armed officers arrive at the door at 10 o'clock at night. But the intent was to send a clear message that I should not go forward with my truthful testimony before members of Congress. I think the intent was to intimidate, and I did feel intimidated and afraid, but I also knew that I had to go forward with my testimony at that point. I didn't want to be setting the precedent that those sorts of intimidation tactics could be effective. So I did go forward and testify. I shared the story of my firing as well as the story of what had happened leading up to my firing because I think it's important for people to know the lengths that the leaders of the Department of Justice are going to keep people quiet and to conceal what is really happening there.
Was there backlash after you testified? Like, did they continue to intimidate you?
I've been in some litigation with the department about various things. I don't want to get too in all of the details of it, but it's ongoing, and I am spending a lot of time and energy now litigating against the Department of Justice, which is not something that I ever expected I would be doing in my career as a lawyer.
How is the case going?
Well, everything is going very slowly because the Department of Justice seems to realize that they don't have a leg to stand on from a legal perspective. So they are trying to delay and stonewall at every opportunity. And to some extent, it's been working. The courts are really flooded with litigation because of all of the unlawful actions that are being taken by this administration. And so the delay tactics are having some effect, and my cases have not progressed very far. The department is really not operating in good faith from my perspective. They're refusing to comply with the rules of litigation. They're refusing to produce discovery, which is required. They're refusing to produce the documents that substantiate my explanation of the facts leading up to my firing. So it's been a really, really frustrating and disheartening process, but I think it's important that I keep moving forward with it because there needs to be some accountability for these firings. They have illegally fired civil servants throughout the government and in the Department of Justice, as I mentioned. They've really been targeting career experts, so they need to be challenged and they need to be stopped.
How can we best fight back as people who aren't in government, as people who don't necessarily have the experience of that? What are the best ways you think that we can make noise and fight back and change the situation?
I think that staying informed is a really big part of it. There's so much temptation. I feel it on a daily basis to just turn away and stick our heads in the sand and stop thinking about all of the bad news. But I don't think we can give in to that. I think it's important that we continue to stay informed and to ask for accountability from our elected representatives. I have seen people doing that in so many creative ways on social media, and I think that does make a difference. In the end, it's going to be our citizens who hold our government to account. I was really optimistic before that, maybe it would be Congress, maybe it would be the courts, but I think, we've got to rely on ourselves. We've got to rely on ourselves and our fellow citizens, and building these communities of people who really care is really important.
What is making you feel like we have hope for the future?
Well, I think it's exactly what I was just talking about, knowing that there are so many people out there who are really invested and engaged and doing whatever they can from their corner of the world to resist our slide into autocracy is really encouraging to me. I really didn't fully appreciate how engaged and active the communities are on social media, folks on TikTok and Instagram who are asking great questions, sharing information really actively, helping each other to organize. That has really helped to boost my own morale and to motivate me to keep going and to keep speaking out about what's happening in the Department of Justice and what's happening with pardons. And that gives me hope that we will find a way through this chaos.
Well, thank you so much, Liz. It was wonderful to talk to you and to hear your story and how we get through this.
It was great to talk with you too, Ariella. Thank you so much for taking the time.